On October 19th, 2019, I stood in a room in London and gave a keynote entitled The Information and the Network Effect. You can find the video on YouTube if you want. I want to start this talk with my final words from last year. The disease metaphor is apt. The impact of information transmission across the social networks exposes the fact that our ability to discern facts from fictions is fundamentally challenged by the loss of obvious beacons radiating signal instead of noise, and the ease in which false signals can be created and propagated. There are serious consequences to the complete lack of any breaks to the transmission, to the collapse of distance, force multiplied by the exploitation of the network, both by bad actors and the network custodians, who will cheerfully take the money from, just about anybody, and also sit back and watch the money roll in from the racists and the conspiracy nuts, the regressions of the mean. We need a vaccine, but we also need an immune system upon which it can work, both regulation mechanisms within the networks and regulatory mechanisms that need to be applied to networks. And we need to go back to basics, stamp out the source of infectious pathogenic information. We're looking at you, Twitter. Get ahead and be able to quarantine areas off, slow the speed at which pathogenic information propagates, control the information on how the network sees each of us, and control what we share and to whom. And we also need to better understand the world we now live in. It's no use raging against the machines, for the folks showing us how to do things we've never done before on YouTube are the better angels. The conversations and expert perspectives of Twitter and the detailed how-tos and discussions on Reddit are powerful, enlightening things, and used responsibly, they are great equalisers. A constitutional law expert is the same distance away as, and I for one would really like it if those who think the current way of doing things in our part of the world is so bad spent quite a bit more time thinking about how to make sure that we don't fall foul of the issues that have bedeviled the other limbs of the information. Because that's the mistake the original creators of the network made, and it's always a good idea to learn from history. At approximately the same date as I was speaking to the attendees of last year's Rave Technologies conference, a talk replete with the imagery and metaphors of a viral outbreak, uncontrollable, uncontainable, the virus we now know as COVID-19 was emerging in Hubei province in China. Just 7 weeks after my talk, the first known human patient was infected, entering Wuhan Hospital on December the 16th. That's 51 weeks ago. In the UK, to date, the virus has killed somewhere around 75,000 people. That's a bit more than perished during the Blitz of the Second World War, and over a similar elapsed time. It's equivalent to 50% of the population of the city of Oxford here in the UK. And of course, the numbers will sadly rise still further. Tragically, the numbers in many countries are even higher, and there are few nations who can claim to have the virus under control within their borders. It's hard to think of anything that hasn't been deeply and dramatically affected by the virus, a truly novel disease that will likely remain within the human population for many, many decades. I don't know about you, but I've taken quite a few decisions this year, more than usual, in an organisation that has also taken more decisions than normal, some of which are very consequential indeed, and I'm going to talk more on that later. And as the year has progressed, I've been thinking and observing how decisions, both good and bad, have been made, and this is a talk about exactly that, how to take a decision. I'm going to start by revisiting some of the decisions that I, and you no doubt, have been involved in as well so far this year. And then I'm going to talk about what I consider to be two key components of any decision-making process. And then I'm going to look at some of the decisions we'll all face in the years and indeed decades ahead. And seeing as it's 2020, I'll try to finish with an inspirational quote. No promises though, it is 2020 after all. Here in the UK, the Prime Minister finally decided that a national lockdown was required in order to stop the virus spreading out of control and also to prevent our National Health Service from collapsing under the strain of the disease. Now, the IET, we'd actually expected this announcement to happen a week earlier at least. We'd taken a look at the data and what the government had already laid out, and we'd done a bunch of work on what each escalation in severity would mean for our staff. Some of us were already working from home prior to the announcement, as we made our assessments and established that, as it wasn't required for us to be in the office, we should already get used to working from home. Now, at this time, we were running from our business continuity plan. I'm sure you've all got one, and I'm also sure that this year you found out just how good or otherwise they actually are. I'm going to go out on a limb here and say that COVID has changed the attitudes of future participants in business continuity exercises and rewrites. We did have a plan for the total loss of the IET's HQ in Stevenage, but it was based on the idea that a plane might crash into it, not that our mutual presence inside it might be unhealthy or indeed fatal. The decisions, of course, at this time were all happening within that pre-existing framework. Just read the flipping manual and do what it says. And so we went home and we turned on our laptops. And here I want to give a special shout out to my colleague Wayne Murphy, a true Yorkshireman, who's managed to procure a very substantial number of laptops and get them all running properly at incredible short notice. It's probably best not to inquire too deeply on how he managed to achieve this feat. Anyway, we started to figure out how to work from home and collaborate from home and meet with each other from home. And some of that was done well and some of it was done badly. But within a few weeks, the organisation didn't come crashing to a stop. Things carried on. The organisation realised that not only could it exist as a distributed network, it could function just as well. At the most senior levels in our organisation came the realisation that deeply held beliefs and assumptions about productivity were actually unsupported by the data. Despite the incredible challenges of the pandemic, we weren't surviving, we were doing much better than that. And so some profound decisions have been made. The IET organisation that will re-enter our head office in Stevenage a year or so from now will not be the same as the one that existed on March the 23rd, 2020. And more on that later. And so, to this guy. Now, as I'm putting this together, the current occupant of 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue has not conceded and is hoping that he will engineer a way to stay resident of that great house. I don't think he's going to have much success there, but it's been interesting to watch him try. This is him in late April, musing on the idea that injecting disinfectant into those with the virus will sort the problem out. I don't know whether reading it is worse than seeing it, but I do know that this wasn't the worst he had to offer on the subject of treatment options. This was. The President of the United States had tweeted that people should look to use hydroxychloroquine and azithromycin. I practiced that, I'm going to leave it in, as a drug cocktail to combat the disease. He even quoted a scholarly journal, the International Journal of Microbial Agents, published by Elsevier, and later at a press conference came this quote. Now, normally, getting your journal tweeted by the POTUS would be considered something of a coup. Sorry, that's a bad choice of words, and I hope I don't regret that by the time you get to listen to me. But as scores of horrified health specialists immediately spoke up, this combination of drugs is extremely dangerous and can often be fatal, especially if administered to people for whom it is not suitable. And it turned out that although it was published, it was wrong. The Lancet, trying to push through research that would directly save lives, was also caught out by a deeply problematic paper on the same subject. In fact, across the board, journals were and are having to cope with how to both scrutinise and rapidly advance research in a responsible and safe manner. The preprint depositories were and are having quite the time of it. You may be familiar with the yellow stripe of truth that runs across the entries in medRxiv, attempting to alert people to the fact that none of this stuff has been peer-reviewed, and please journalists act responsibly when reporting on this. It's clear that the challenges here are considerable, whether it's dubious authors or just bad science, or even good science that's simply wrong. The stakes are high, and even higher when in a complete upending of how it might normally work, someone with 74 million Twitter followers and the ability to direct the apparatus of the most powerful nation on the planet just decides to go there with some bonkers idea or other. Decisions, decisions, decisions. On May 25th, George Perry Floyd Jr. was killed by a police officer. The officer in question decided to kneel on his neck for just a little over 8 minutes. He wasn't the first. Neither were Trayvon Martin, killed by the civilian George Zimmerman in 2012 and acquitted in 2014 of his murder, or Michael Brown, shot by a police officer in Ferguson, St Louis in 2014, or Eric Gardner, choked to death by a New York police officer, also in 2014, to name but three. He hasn't been the last. Breonna Taylor was shot in her own apartment in March of this year, and Jacob Blake was shot by a police officer on August 23rd of this year. It was Michael Brown back in 2014 for me. I know St Louis well. I have family there. I actually have a passing familiarity with Ferguson, and I know some about the conditions that forced the police and black communities into conflict even before overt racism is added into matters. I have first-hand knowledge of how police officers out there have treated me after a spot of rapid progress on the freeway versus the experience of my wife's black friends. Black Lives Matter emerged as a call to action in 2014, and on and off it flickered in white consciousness for years, until, for some reason, this time, the horrific death of George Floyd triggered a bit more than a shudder and some words of expressed outrage and sympathy amongst at least some white folk. Out came the hashtags, the nice statements on social media, the press releases. One or two societies actually acknowledged their problematic history, and here in the UK the National Trust took the step of acknowledging that a great many of its properties were built off the back of the profits of the slave trade, and were promptly pilloried for doing so by a certain segment of the white community. It's only very recently that the penny dropped for me. Those musty pictures and plaques and rooms and building names, the signifiers of the largest empire the world has ever known, didn't mean so much to me. Different times. The past as a foreign country. We do things differently now. It's only now I get the glimmer of what that might mean to a black person. A bit more on those bromides of solidarity. Fair to say, there's been a response to many of those. I want to pull out a couple of examples, and the point to be taken here is not the specifics, just how widespread the problems are. Oxford University did a lovely statement. A day later, they declined to publish the performance data on their efforts to address inequality because, quote, it wasn't the right time. The numbers are bad. Of course they are. Cambridge has similar issues. St Andrews University went for hashtag Blackout Tuesday, after which the former black, Asian and minority ethnic officer of the university pointed out that until recently they used to run an event called the Bongo Ball, where students dressed up to represent the look of Africa, and yes, some of them decided that that meant blackface. People complained, but it was for charity, so that made it all right. They finally stopped doing this a few years back. And yet other institutions struggle with the idea that removing the racist name from above the door of the lecture theatre might be a good thing to do. You should spend a good amount of time reading the experiences of black people via the Black in the Ivory hashtag on Twitter. We're putting oppressors and racists on the editorial boards of our journals, people. God only knows what that means in terms of the research that we publish, but I have read some truly horrific articles published this year in serious, responsible journals. You should read this shocking compilation of racism inside our own scholarly publishing industry. The people who did the things that are referenced in these two links are still in our industry. And you should also watch the great West Indian cricketer Michael Holding speaking about the need for education for all of us in that YouTube video. It's decision time. As white people, we get to pick and choose when we are done with racial justice. Our black brothers and sisters do not. Here's the map. 80 million Americans voted blue, and I guess we're all breathing again. The administration of number 45 was not a good one for science, for scholarship, for expertise. Beyond the media, real damage has been done to many of the bedrock institutions of the USA, and a great many of those institutions are the bedrock of global scholarly endeavour, such is their reach and influence. There's a lot of work to be done here, I for one am looking forward to the USA rejoining the Paris Climate Agreement and hopefully participating fully in the desperately urgent work that needs to be done to combat the global climate emergency. This vote was truly pivotal. Not the usual back and forth of democratic politics, but a fundamental Rubicon to be crossed. One hopes that the new administration will restore sober women and men of probity and good judgment to head up the key institutions that have so much effect on our lives, whether we live within the United States or not. And now to take a look at a couple of those key tools for taking decisions. There are, of course, two types of decisions. And I'm not talking about the good ones and the bad ones. Well, okay. Yes, there clearly are good ones and bad ones. But I'm talking here actually about the way that Jeff Bezos sees decisions. And he's been quite successful in growing his online book delivery business, so it's worth paying attention to what he has to say. This is the first key component of a robust decision process. Understanding just what sort of decision you are making. Here's Jeff. Some decisions are consequential and irreversible or nearly irreversible, one-way doors, and these decisions must be made methodically, carefully, slowly, with great deliberation and consultation. If you walk through and don't like what you see on the other side, you can't get back to where you were before. We can call these type 1 decisions. But most decisions aren't like that. They're changeable, reversible. They're two-way doors. If you've made a suboptimal type 2 decision, you don't have to live with the consequences for that long. You can reopen the door and go back through. Type 2 decisions can and should be made quickly by high judgment individuals or small groups. As organisations get larger, there seems to be a tendency to use the heavyweight type 1 decision making process on most decisions, including many type 2 decisions. The end result of this is slowness, unthoughtful risk aversion, failure to experiment sufficiently, and consequently diminished invention. We'll have to figure out how to fight that tendency. That was Jeff Bezos in his letter to shareholders when Amazon became the fastest company to reach 100 billion in annual sales, with 10 billion of that coming from AWS, Amazon Web Services. If we were together, I'd take a moment to go around the room and see if anyone wanted to bring their thoughts as to whether they had a type 1 decision making process for a type 2 world, or whether even the reverse was true. Bezos is talking about failure and how to build failure into a growth strategy that allows for innovation to spring forth. Amazon Web Services is a classic example, monetizing the waste products of a system, the infrastructure needed to deliver all those books, and take decisions on how to follow the opportunities that present themselves. The grand challenges that lie ahead of all of us will require that we have a framework that allows us to figure out when it's truly a type 1 decision, and also how we enable a lot more type 2 decisions to be taken. At Amazon, the two types of decision are managed very differently. It's a cultural thing. It's bound up in their principles and how they utilize their policies or rules. And it's true for all of us. It's just that we almost certainly treat too many choices like they're type 1. And now this, the second component. This is an equation. In fact, it's Bayes' decision rule, and not to put too fine a point on it, it rules our lives. This equation is used in financial instruments to make all sorts of decisions. Should you be given this loan? Should this investment be made? And it's used very heavily in machine learning to enable machines to make decisions based on the data that they receive. And in my opinion, it should be used a lot more by us in order to help us structure our decision making. For it's all about taking an initial decision and then repeatedly and incrementally seeing if it's still the right decision to make, or whether it should be altered or even stopped. You can read more about this in Nate Silver's excellent book, The Signal and the Noise, which is all about how to model things and then make predictions with those models. I highly recommend it. It's not designed as a business book, but I think it's one of the best business books ever written, actually. It's superb. Here, I've presented a method from Nate that shows how you can use probability to adjust your assessment of whether an idea, a feature, a new business, or a key choice you have to make will be a success. And it works actually remarkably simply. Take a guess. Gather some data on your guess. Decide on the probabilities that that data supports your hypothesis. The numbers I put in here are just to illustrate, by the way. And then you run the calculation. And you repeat. You use the new estimate that you've arrived at as your prior, and then you're ready to apply new information to it. It's not your standard business plan. In my opinion, this technique is not used anywhere near enough by us, so this is my pitch again to try and change that. But to make it work, you need the culture, the process and the discipline to rationally approach the business of creating something new. And you need to understand that failure is not only an option, it's a feature of the process. And your success when it comes will have more than a small amount of luck attached to it. You create, you build, you test, you analyse, you adjust, you repeat, and you ask, is it a failure? And that's the way to go here. And remember this, nothing ever sprang up in an instant, and it always takes more than one go. This is how Jeff thinks. And this is how those type 2 decisions are built up and up and up until it is time to kick over to the type 1 process and go big or go home. You can, of course, try to do this quantitatively, or you can build a framework for thinking that allows for a qualitative approach. This fits very nicely with agile development approaches, and is the reason we should all be doing a lot more prototyping of the things we're looking to develop. Build, test, measure, decide, repeat. And now to the big challenges that we face. This picture here is the end of an era. It's the view from my desk at the IET, and it'll never actually be seen again. I took this in September. We're refurbishing our office in Stevenage, and by refurbishing I mean stripping it back to its guts and building it back new again. It is a radical transformation. And COVID changed our thinking on this building. Bluntly, the virus showed that there was no absolute need for nearly all of us at the IET to get in our cars and drive and park and sit, well, occasionally anyway, at our desks and then get in our cars and go home again. Not only could we function from home, we could do much, much more. We could thrive. And so, a building refurb plan was paused, because it is a type 1 decision, and we paused it so we could ask ourselves a few questions as the weeks turned to months and productivity didn't drop. Old assumptions and beliefs have been ripped up. When your offerings are basically digital information offerings, there's very few roles and tasks that actually require being in an office. Sure, you'll want to come together at times to collaborate and ideate and so on, but you don't need endless rows of desks for that. So, big gulp time. The reconfigured building will be a resource instead. You'll come to it when you want to use it for something. Roughly a year from now, all being well, it'll be done and we'll head back in once in a while, maybe 2 days in the week, to make use of the meeting spaces and to have the face-to-face interactions that are needed. And the rest of the time, we'll be working from home. We'll have to figure out that virtual collaboration, the mixed participation models of the physical and the virtual, and the purpose of this building will be to enable the ideas and thinking, not corral the workers for their daily 8 hours. A lot will need to be figured out, a lot of decisions both during the rebuild and after. And I reckon you'll be facing the same sorts of decisions. How to work, where to work, when to work, how to lead, how to manage, how to communicate and collaborate, because this looks like the new business continuity. By the end of this year, I did the calculation and this blows me away actually. I will have gained over a month of usable time back from my commute to and from the IET. It's 36 days in fact, give or take a bit. I think COVID will restructure the way we do our work, and I want you to think about this. There was a time before the iPhone. Think now what our current crude video presence will be like after the tech companies have stuck their A-teams on the problem. The new IET building will have to cope with that change, just like its occupants. And here's the second one. It's decision time. 2020 needs to be the year When we finally got our act together and realised that our black, Asian, minority, ethnic, indigenous and other people of colour should be an equal part of our academic, society and publishing world, properly represented at all levels. It is frankly shameful that it took the death of another black man at the hands of the authorities to once again stir some awakening of the lived reality of our fellow human beings. But it's going to take a lot more than a couple of hashtags and a national or an international day or two. You should go look. Don't worry, it's not too hard to find academics and more who don't think there's an issue, who all can't see the need to bother, or actually worse. As Michael Holding said in that video, education, education, education. And if we had to change the numbers, and the diversity facts and figures are shocking, if we're doing a better job, there won't be a scant 100 black professors in the UK, and only 30 of those female. I'm told the UKSG Women in Science panel in 2019 was 100% white. That this is a programme of work that will take a decade, perhaps more, before we can look at these words with pride and not longing. And then we come to the third and the big one, the global climate emergency. We have 10 years, that's it. We don't get this sorted by 2030, then it's game over for a very large number of the humans on this planet. I don't think our descendants will look kindly on us in that case. That 36 days of my life that I got back this year by not driving basically since mid-March, well, that's about 20,000 miles or so, and that's a couple of tons of CO2, just me. In fact, myself and one of my team, who also had a similar length commute to me, account apparently for 16% of the IET's carbon emissions from commuting to and from the office. That's the commuting emissions. We have roughly 600 people between our 3 UK offices. One of the goals of the building refurb is to take a 70s office building and bring it up to spec in terms of emissions and efficiency, a genuine investment in a future for a building that has a lifespan of, well, centuries. And I can say this, as part of a wider IET strategic commitment, the IT department at the IET will be carbon neutral by 2030. That's the goal. No, we've got no idea right now how we're going to do it, but I know that we'll need that Bayesian tool to help us, because there's only one way you can actually do this. Sure, you could pretend, you could do some carbon offset, buy some credits and some trees, pretend your power is the good sort, that sort of thing. But the only test that matters here is the one that involves understanding what carbon expenditure actually is across all of the supply chains and products and systems that we use. I think we'll need to factor carbon into our calculations about compute. I think almost certainly we'll have to grapple with a carbon budget, which means understanding the flux of carbon through our systems and our suppliers, and thinking about how we build things and how we get the information we'll need to figure this out. And then we'll have to take some hard decisions. We'll have to engage with the realities that modern economic business theory likes to pretend do not exist. We'll have to ask questions of our suppliers and our partners and of ourselves. What's the carbon value of this activity? A change in our fundamental working practices can be a good thing here, availing ourselves of the diverse perspectives and knowledge of a wider group of humanity as well. But make no mistake, this is it. We cannot decide to kick this down the road any longer. And here comes the affirming end to this talk. Today, a vaccine approved for use next week in the UK. 51 weeks. It's an incredible achievement, with 2 more vaccines, one a fridge storable version, just weeks away from approval. Experts did this. Experts standing on the shoulders of giants sequenced the viral genome, determined the protein structures that could be targeted by our immune systems, and used the power of 21st century knowledge to go from zero through every stage of discovery and testing in less than a year. It turns out that experts are really important. It turns out that facts matter. It turns out that the scientific process from research to publication to regulatory approval has been tested this year. And here we are. But the disinformation merchants won't stop. The parasites of the scholarly world who treasure research funding above all else and are happy to fake their results won't stop. And we now enter perhaps the greatest logistical challenge this planet has faced: how to get these vaccines to everyone as fast as possible. It's been a horrific year. I think that largely our industry has so far escaped the worst of it, but I doubt there's any one of us who's escaped its touch, whether directly or not. I just want to say this: good luck everyone, take care of yourselves and stay safe. Wear a damn mask, and perhaps we'll meet again in an actual room next year. Thanks for your time.